When I was growing up and a cousin pulled me aside once, he just snatched me in my collar. He just snatched me up. It's like, get out behind your mother's coattail, he told me. I hadn't seen him in about a year or so I didn't really recognize him. So he said, Byron, I'm your daddy, boy. And when he said that, I recognized his voice. And then I ran to him. And he came to me and he picked me up and he hugged me. And I was in his chest and I could smell his cologne. And I felt the safest and securest I've ever felt in my life. One of the things I learned, again, is I had to forgive my father, right? In order to get rid of that anger, I had to forgive my father. In order to fill that void, I had to what? Forgive my father.
This is what bothers me about American culture, to be quite honest. We are extremely nonchalant and lackadaisical about procreation and reproduction.
Hello, and welcome to the Father Factor Podcast. I'm your host, Byron Ricks, and today my co-host is Josh, and my guest co-host is Brandon. I say guest co-host because we may replace him.
I'm replaceable, apparently. I guess,
no, I'm kidding.
dispensable.
I'm kidding. Guys, how you guys doing today?
Josh, how you doing, man?
Oh man, it's been a challenging time, but I'm doing good.
Challenging time. What's going on?
School's wrapping up for the kids.
Yeah.
I had to go get my daughter from college. She just got a job too, and so it's just been a lot of just unexpected ripping and running. A lot of baseball, man, is going long because of all the rain. Out here we've been getting all that rain, so. Man, all the reschedules, surprise, so Monday at 8 p.m., you got a baseball game.
Father stuff. You've been doing father stuff.
Yeah, so it's just, doing my thing,
Good. So, guys, we're going to have a good show today. I've gotten some feedback, and, we started this podcast a couple of years ago, so I think this is our third season, if I remember correctly. And it's based on a book that I wrote called Searching for Dad, 9 Side Effects of Growing Up Fatherless and How to Overcome Them. And what I've learned of those side effects, there are 9, it could be 10, it could be 15, but my research, I came up with 9. And one of those side effects is the void that the void that sons feel. And now I've learned that even daughters feel the same way. They feel that same void when the father is not in the home, when they're fatherless. In fact, the question was asked of me earlier, well, what is fatherless? How about if the father comes on the weekend, or they see them a couple times a week? And Brandon and I had a different definition or belief, is that right, Brandon, as what fatherlessness is. And from my perspective, fatherlessness is when the father's not in the kid's life at all. And I experienced that growing up. I didn't grow up with my father. I grew up with a single mom, welfare, latchkey kid, west side of Chicago. And I remember the first time I actually felt the void, or I could identify it, should I say. I went to Catholic schools, and they had Father's Sunday. And I didn't have a father, but I went to school with some twins, Daryl and Darwin. And they had a dad at home and had sisters and siblings. And their father said, Byron can go with us. And so I went to my first Bulls game. We sit way up in the bleachers, man. Way up. All I could see was the logo of the bull.
The air was thin up there.
I want a hot dog. Remember that joke that the comedian said, I want a hot dog, and he called the hot dog guy? And the guy said, he thought he would bring the hot dog up there, and the guy said, no, you got to come down here.
Yeah.
I was sitting in those seats,
yeah.
And the players looked like ants running around down there. But I remember sitting there, and their father bought hot dogs and popcorn for us, and he was everything he brought them, he brought me.
Yeah.
But I was sitting there though, and I was looking over, and one of the twins was sitting in his lap, and then the other twin was trying to push him out of his lap, and he was trying to sit in his lap, and they were playing with the popcorn, and they was just having fun with their dad. And even though I was there, I wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't there. And I remembered when I got home that day and I went to bed and I was looking up at the ceiling, And that was the first time I was able to identify the void in my life, what was really missing. I knew it in the back of my mind as a kid. I just couldn't pinpoint it until I saw them interact with their father.
Yeah.
So, and so what I've learned is that children, boys and girls, that grow up without their fathers, they experience this void. They just can't identify it sometimes. And what they do is try to fill that void.
Yeah.
And how do they try to fill that void? With sex, with drugs, with sports, with spending, all these other things that make you feel a certain way in a moment. But what happens is, once you get back home, you get in that bed, you look at the ceiling, your dad is not in your life, hasn't interacted with you, and the clothes in the closet or on the floor, your friends are gone, the drugs are worn off, and now what are you left with?
Well, it makes me think of a Tupac song called Papa's Song.
Okay.
I won't go into all of it, but there's a part, he said something along the line, I prayed to a starry night, Lord, please send me pops before puberty, the things I would do to see peaceful family unity.
Yes.
Right, because he said, it started off with I used to play catch by myself outside. What a sorry sight. But then he went to like what you're talking about, laying in bed at night, right? He's praying, Lord, send me a pops before puberty.
You know what, Tupac, I should get paid on that. I should get paid on that.
Yeah.
So, but let's identify what the void is. Let's identify that. What is the void? It's more than just an absence. It's an emptiness, a hollowness that grows within when a father's presence is missing, whether it be physically, emotionally, or spiritually. So that suggests that a father can actually what? Be in the home, but yet not connected with you spiritually, emotionally, or physically. So it's more than just having that father there. That father has to also be able to connect.
So the quality of the connection, the quality of the time versus the quantity of the time.
Yes.
Yeah. That's why I think for me, the definition of fatherlessness is not just about the physical absence. It's also about the, as you stated here, emotional, mental, and spiritual absence. You can have a father who is physically present, and I've seen a lot of individuals that have grown up in this same type of situation where their father is quote unquote there, right? They know where their father is, but he's not really there, and they still experience the same issues that you're describing here in the void.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know I looked to fill that void with other males. And I was always let down and disappointed because I had unrealistic expectations about how that man, or even that friend, he could be my age, because I was still looking for that male to be in my life like a brother, father, male.
Yeah.
And I was looking to feel it that way. And I would always get let down because either that person would do something that would surprise me, or they didn't want to be my friend anymore, or even when my mother didn't date a lot. I give her credit for that. And I used to get frustrated with her for that, by the way. I was like, Mom, don't you need a boyfriend?
We need a dad around
I need
here.
a daddy. But my mother was just adamant about not having men around me because she was afraid of how they might treat me.
Yeah.
She said, I'm not going to have someone around you that won't respect you, won't protect you. They'll get angry with you because of something I did or said. So she just chose not to date. So I didn't have a lot of males around me in that way. I grew up with a host of females.
Yeah.
To our friend's point,
Arize is in the building.
Arize is in the building.
He's in the building.
Yeah.
Behind the cameras, you can't see our boy Arize.
Yeah.
He's holding it down for us.
But I can relate to Arize when he said he has a relative that's growing up with women only, and he can begin to see behaviors.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I can remember when I was growing up, and a cousin pulled me aside once and just snatched me in my collar. You know, he just snatched me up. It's like, get off behind your mother's coattail, he told me.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that was the best thing that happened to me. You know, he toughened me up a little bit. I wasn't as tough. But also to help me become a tough, and I'm not saying being tough, being a man, being a male, toughness is about that. But I am saying we have to learn to be tough.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a level of strength that we have to exude,
Right.
you know, in life as men, and unfortunately, women are not wired that way. They're wired to nurture, you know, and they look a lot of times as a young boy's rambunctious nature as a negative. I mean, even in school, how I think academia is really geared and wired towards young girls. Young boys that can't sit still are viewed as bad kids. They can't focus. The kids that want to run around, they want to tussle, they want to do these things, and these things are not negative, but the school environment is sit still, look straight, don't talk, don't speak, and little girls thrive in that environment. Little boys have a hard time with that because they want to explore and experience the world at a young age as adolescents. And so I think it's the same thing in the dynamics when you have a young boy that's growing up around only women. The women are making, whether they are doing it intentionally or not, they're making him conform to what makes them feel comfortable.
Not deliberately making him, but causing him.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's why I said whether intentionally or unintentionally.
Right. It causes them to do that.
Yeah, and you know, what would you say then, Byron, for today's society that again, in the American context, where I think that there's a lot of belief that is circulating around that a woman can raise a young boy without the necessity of a father involved. What would you say to those individuals that are purporting that type of worldview and they think that they're just fine and their young men have grown up without a father and everything is good? What would you say to them about the void?
Well, as our guest Jeff once said, the CEO we had on, a woman cannot make a man. So I think that, as Arize said earlier, a woman can put her son in a situation where he has access and exposure to men, whether it be on a team or in an environment where there are men, and that male then begins to adapt male behaviors. But if it takes two people to create the kid, it takes two people to create the kid for a reason. Now, today, I know that you can take a woman's egg and you can take the sperm and do all that. You don't need the man and the woman to do all that. But yet and still, you still need the DNA of both of them.
So, I mean, I say it like this.
To create that male.
I can choose to drink and drive, right? And I may get home okay, but I may not. But it doesn't mean it's a good idea. So, like, choosing just because I can doesn't mean you should. If you look at the statistics, you automatically putting your child at a disadvantage for everything. If you as a woman are choosing that, I get certain partners, this, that, whatever, but there comes a level of intentionality where if you are raising a boy, you want to make sure that you put some quality men around them. Right. And that could be sports. That could be, there's so many different outlets for that, but there's a level of intentionality, right? And it's not I don't need a man, they don't need this, we do, but just because you survive something doesn't mean that you're going to thrive in life. I survived, but at what cost, right?
Well, I've heard women say, I don't need a man, I don't need a husband, he doesn't need a father, I'm his mother, I'm his father.
Right.
I can raise him by myself. And yeah, you can, and a lot of women do a great job doing that.
Happy Father's Day to all those real moms out there.
I tell the story of when my father came to Chicago. I was about 5 years old, and he came to Chicago, and I was outside playing, and he called me. He said, Byron, and I looked at him, and he was about Josh's complexion, by the way, so I thought he was insurance.
That high yellow.
I thought he was insurance man or something. Who is this guy calling me? Because I hadn't seen him, because my mother took me from him, if you will, and left the state that we lived in. And so I hadn't seen him in about a year or so I didn't really recognize him. So he said, "Byron, I'm your daddy, boy." And when he said that, I recognized his voice. And then I ran to him. And he came to me, and he picked me up, and he hugged me. And I was in his chest, and I could smell his cologne. And I felt the safest and securest I've ever felt in my life. And by that time, my mother came to the window. We lived in a Courtway building on the first floor. And she said, "Put him down." And I grabbed his neck strong and held on. And he was trying to put me down. And I was holding on to him because I had never felt like that.
Yeah.
I was safe. I felt safe.
Yeah.
And she was telling him to put him down. And he was telling me, "Son, I got to put you down. I got to put you down." And he put me down. And she called me into the house. And I went in the house, and I rushed there because I wanted to see him. I didn't want him to leave. And I was standing by her, and she put her arm around me, and she said, "You're going to be okay." As my father began to walk away, I felt like I'm not safe. I'm not going to be okay. So even though the woman may think she doesn't need the man to raise the kid needs the man in his life.
Right.
The same is true for a mother. I have a niece who doesn't have a mother.
Yep.
You know, she has an aunt that does a great job.
Yep.
But yet, when I have intimate conversations with her, she would tell me, "I miss my mom."
Mm-hmm.
Want to get to the void.
But that's the thing, right? Because my daughter, her biological mom, hasn't really been in her life.
Right.
My wife is doing a great job, right? But there's still a void from that sense of belong, and where is this from? So it's whether it's not just, because imagine if men was on here saying, "I don't need no woman, I can take care of this kid," and all that.
See, you brought up, go ahead, but you brought up another type of void, though.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm not saying it's not valid, and I want you to finish that, but I want to bring your attention to this, in that I have contended that a fatherless boy initially, but a fatherless child, I've contended that they have this void. And one way to fill that void is to have a male in their lives. But now what you're saying to me is your daughter has a biological mom who's not in her life, but your wife is in her life, but yet she still has a void.
My wife
almost contradicts what I'm saying over here.
Let me say it like this.
It does, though.
The void, let's say that my wife fills the void in a lot of ways, but there's still a piece of that biological
your daughter feels
connection.
the void.
I'm saying my wife feels that void
it,
for
not,
my
not
daughter.
Feels
Okay,
it.
feels.
Feels it,
feels the void.
Fills.
Yeah. I'm blessed with speech, y'all. You know what I'm saying? So my wife is feeling that she calls her mommy. Right. That's who she gets her nurturing from and all that. But there is still this curiosity and this desire of wanting to be wanted by your parent, right? So you can fill a void, and she shows all the fruits and all that, but there's still that desire. J Love, who does our song, his step pops was a great father.
He speaks highly of his
very highly of him. But there is still that little boy in him that wonders, why am I not good enough for my father?
So then, are we saying then that to have that step parent in the life, or that mentor or that surrogate in the life, it may not completely fill the void, but it does prohibit that kid or lessens the chances of that kid filling the void with other things that are not good for him or her.
If you have the right person in that position, right, you got right people in there, I believe. But if you talk about the void at 100%, right? So imagine nobody's there, right? Yeah, mom might be able to handle a tithe of that void by herself, right? And then if you put a step parent or uncle or whoever in place, they might, let's say they can fill 80 or 90% of that void, but there's still going to be something remaining. There's still some curiosity, curious. So I'm saying that the outcome with having that support, having that surrogate, having that person there, you can't argue with it. It's incredible, but there is still something there where there's a curiosity, a longing.
Well,
or
and you hear that from kids that are adopted as well and have great parents.
Great parents, and the parents are offended. Why would you want to look at? Because I'm curious. Because you said something earlier about. Well, no, you said something earlier about boys and school and all that. Boys want to explore. They're curious in a different way than girls are curious too, in a different way. Girls will talk and they can group up. We're exploring. We're looking for stuff. We're digging. It's just a difference in the curiosity. And when you try to group it all into one space and say, all of you conform to this thinking, it's going to be hard. So I feel that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that kind of stuck out to me and from your teaching is you described in the book how as a boy gets older and they surpass the point of the pubescent age. And you talked about this, how when you were looking in the mirror.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say that.
Right, you were looking for your father.
Right.
Right, you were looking for features that resemble your father. You weren't looking for your mother.
Right.
And that it stuck out to me, and I think that is true. I think that even, for example, my son and I will be out in certain places, and it's almost kind of annoying at times because people will say, "Oh, man, he looks just like you," and it's like, well, no, he doesn't. He's got his own look, right? Are there features that are similar? Absolutely, but people take a pride in identifying them like their father. It is a progression of the line and lineage, right? And for thousands of years of human history, we have taken pride in our seed, in our progeny. Somewhere we've allowed our progeny to be unimportant, to be not as significant. And so a father removes himself from the picture, not recognizing that your child, your son, is an iteration. He is a extension of your line and lineage.
Right.
And the resemblance that the son is looking for, he's looking for those features on his father to be able to find points of relation. And if you don't have that, right, and for you, it's like you heard his voice and you recognized him, but you hadn't seen his face. Right, and that's the reason why I think that presence is so important, because it's what you're getting from your father practicing presence, as they say, in your life, is more than just a physical connection. It is the imparting of ideas and beliefs and ways of doing things that you're not getting. Hence the reason why there's that void, because you're trying to fill it with other things. Okay, well, do I get it from a cousin? Do I get it from an uncle? Is my mom trying to fill that with ideas, right? But at the end of the day, what you need is your father's voice in your life to have an understanding of who you are as a person. It ultimately helps to solidify your identity.
Because you said looking in the mirror, right? Because I remember doing that. Like, oh man, what part of me looks like him? She says I look like him, but there is another part that I realized too. Because I was that kid that got in trouble all the time. So much so that I'd take those state tests. And depending on which one, I'd ace them. And then, there's no way. And I have to take them again. So, because I moved around, I wasn't focused. I didn't do homework. I was curious. I had more, constantly out of his seat. That was one of the big ones, out of his seat. But I wasn't dumb. And so I used to question, man, what's wrong with me? Did I get this from my dad? Is this how he is? Not just physical, but behavioral patterns, right? So there's a curiosity. And if we have mothers that are also saying, you act like your dad, you this like your dad, and they have a poor look at their out on their father, the outlook on their father is poor, then what is that saying to the kid? I'm not good like my father's not good, right? So if your daddy ain't this, we know what I'm saying, your daddy ain't, then, but I act like him and I look like him according to you, so what are you saying about me? Right. So are you helping the void? Are you being intentional about not filling the void with garbage? Or are you being intentional about filling it with substance and love and lessons?
Which leads me to my next point, because as I grew older, I realized, especially after I wrote the book was lethargic for me. Is it cathartic?
Yeah.
For me. Except I'm on speech. See, cathartic. See, I've been around you too long.
Being around me too long.
Lethargic. It's like, wait a minute. It made you lethargic.
It made you tired. I bet. There's a lot of research.
I've been around Josh too long. I gotta be around some more educated people. I'm telling you. Got me pronouncing words. But it was freeing after I wrote the book, because I lost a lot of my anger. One of the side effects I talk about is the silent anger. I lost a lot of my anger because I was able to get it out in the book and do the research, because it took me 5 years to write the book.
Yeah.
I had to do 5 years of research because I realized I couldn't just write a book about me and my life. I had to find out and validate points, and I did that. But once I wrote the book, I felt better about myself. But also I realized I had been trying to fill that void with sex. I had been trying to fill that void with weed. I wasn't I didn't do hard drugs, but I did a lot of weed. I was trying to fill that void with strip clubs, and all of those things I was trying to fill that void with. And it was one day I was sitting in the men's group at church, and I realized that I could fill the void through my belief in the Lord Jesus Christ. Deep. Something I want to read to you here really quick. It said that we was doing a study, and in the study it said we were studying about our bloodline. And one of the statements, quotes that were made, you were made in the image of God. You are of a kingly bloodline. You are co-heirs with Christ. That's not religious talk. That's identity. Hit me like a brick. I said, wow. Wait a minute. I'm connected to something greater than man.
Yeah, but think about that. What do we talk about with these young kids, these young men, right? Maybe, kid raised by all women may show more effeminate qualities and may not be as well received by their male peers, regardless of sexual orientation, right? But at the same time, think about, like, for somebody like me, I got my accolades from other kids that were struggling like me. So I had a group of males that was affirming my poor decisions.
Right.
And so I was getting affirmation. So I remember Lecrae did a song, and he said something like, it was called Just Like You, I believe. He said something, they say I'm good at bad things, at least they're proud of me. Right? So they say I'm good at bad things, but at least they're proud of me. So in some way, shape, or form, that void is going to be filled, and a lot of it does come from that male camaraderie. Like, hey, just do it. It's cool. Oh, man, did you see how you got him? And there's a lot of cheering.
And that happens, I agree. And what I'm saying is that at some point, we have to mature.
Right.
And we have to realize what that is and call it what it is, just like you just did. Right? And so, and for me, I had to rely on the Lord.
Yeah.
Right? Because one of the things I learned, again, is I had to forgive my father. Right? In order to get rid of that anger, I had to forgive my father. In order to fill that void, I had to what? Forgive my father.
But why would you forgive him? Wasn't that such a big favor for him? Because you think a lot of people refuse to forgive because the person that they're forgiving doesn't deserve it. Right.
Well, but again, and that's where my faith comes in. Right. Because I got a line with him. Right. Because he forgives me.
Yep.
You know what? I believe it's the book of Jeremiah that it says that God, not only will he forgive your sins, he will remember them no more. And so I sat there thinking, wait a minute, if my father asked God to forgive him, God would forgive him.
Yeah.
I'm holding on to something that God's already let go.
Right. I mean, and so off of that, I want to challenge people, especially those that have grew up without their father.
Grown up without their father.
Hey,
I'm messing with you now.
Hey, I like it. My wife does it. I'm brilliant outside of the speech, right? But I mean,
no, technologically you are brilliant.
Oh yeah, made in his image. But when do we ask ourselves, what did my dad go through? What did my mom go through? Because you know a lot of my story, Byron.
Right.
And just a lack of guidance and parents, in essence. But I also had to recognize, where were my parents at the age that they had me. For me, they were teenagers. And I got teenager. There ain't no way my daughter could, she'd probably make the kids survive, but there's going to be some struggle.
Right.
So forgiveness isn't just doing a favor for someone like, oh, I owe him or I'm going to forgive them. It is for self, right? But there's also a perspective for people that try to justify their feelings is put yourself in those shoes. I had to put myself in my mother's shoes.
Right.
17 years old, struggling mentally, having a baby. Like she wasn't equipped for that, right? My father, similar thing, teenager, suffered a lot of loss at that time. So how could I have received something from them when they had nothing to give?
And so you're saying then once you walked a mile in their shoes.
Well, once I forgave, it opened me up to receive perspective.
But you didn't forgive until you were able to put yourself in there.
No, I forgave first.
How so? Well,
I realized what you said earlier. Forgiveness is for self, and I didn't want to repeat the same patterns with my daughter.
Okay.
And so when I met Christ, it was about forgiveness, right?
Right.
So I forgave and asked God to help me forgive because I knew, I forgive you.
Okay, so once you forgave is when you begin to see their perspective.
Right.
You begin to see life as they probably lived it at that age. Once you forgave,
my
first.
heart softened. I guess my eyes softened enough to see it from a different vantage point.
After the forgiveness.
Than what I had. Because my vantage point was, you didn't love me, I wasn't good enough,
right.
Blah, 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 blah.
Right. See, and I felt convicted in men's group. I felt convicted of holding those things.
Yeah.
And I knew I had to let them go.
Well, I think that the issue is that there's two concepts here that I think people mistakenly intertwine. They have an assumption that there needs to be connection between the two. Forgiveness and justice, or accountability. You can call it accountability, right? The assumption is that if I grant forgiveness, I am removing this person from accountability, or I'm also equally removing them from suffering the consequences of their actions. And I don't think that those things are true. I think that forgiveness is really more about you, right, than it is about the other person. And you mentioned this in the men's group where the forgiveness that you granted was about your freedom, not about the other person. The forgiveness doesn't justify or remove the person from liability for what they did. They're still going to have to suffer the consequence of their actions. But a lot of times people are reluctant to forgive because of the fact that they are wanting to visually see a repercussion or a consequence of the wrong. Right. They want to see it. They want to see the wrong be right.
And since go ahead.
Well, as we spoke this morning at breakfast, and you talked about your dad and your sisters and how they have this void. They'll tell him every time they see him, they say something negative. You weren't there for us, or
there's just different little things and
innuendos.
Yeah, and I'm in hot water with them now because I said enough.
Okay, but right, and that point is though they have a void.
Right.
They can't fill the void because they won't forgive your dad. Mm-hmm. They won't allow, as you said this morning, they won't see him as he is today.
Right.
They continue to see him as he was yesterday, but yet it hasn't softened their heart yet because they haven't forgave him yet, and so they can let it go.
Right. To clarify, I got 6 sisters on that side, and so it's not all of them. So good luck. You know what I'm saying? I ain't finna catch no smoke on that. But to that point. How do you to fill the void, right? You're fueling the void with unforgiveness. So what happens when you meet somebody?
You're filling the void with unforgiveness. That's the first time I heard that.
Because what happens? Let's just use I'll just use mama. Let's use mama, single mother. She meets a man. She likes the man. She's leery because of past pain, right? But sometimes if there's lack of forgiveness, the first time a certain behavioral trait that's similar to what they've experienced, they might be willing to cut bait and run without offering the grace because of the lack of forgiveness. I'm not going to get caught up again with somebody like this. So what happens if we are limiting our growth, which we are, and the blessing God have for us because we don't have enough room in us for those blessings, because we're holding on to too much room of unforgiveness and thinking through and analyzing behaviors from the past so that you never get hurt again. But if you guard yourself to never be hurt again, you also guard yourself from being blessed and loved and beloved and just all the amazing things that do come through relationship.
Yeah, I think that, in fact, the quote I wrote in the book, accept that there is a spiritual power larger than yourself and watch the void shrink as your faith grows. There is a power larger than us.
Right.
And we have to be able to tap into that.
Right.
Now, for me, it's Jesus.
Yeah.
For others, it may not be Jesus. And that's another whole thing for another day. But what I am saying, that no man is an island.
Right. There's something bigger than us.
So you have to tap into a power greater than yourself. What do you think about that, Brandon?
Yeah, I think that, well, I mean, sans an AA meeting, I mean, there has to, the power can be many things, if you take a relative perspective on it. But for me, the power is always the Most High God.
Right.
And from my vantage point, I think that, yes, if you don't forgive, then you're going to have a difficult time being able to reconcile what's going on in your heart so that you can heal. Now, my curiosity, though, from your perspective is, how does the void in God, what is the correlation between those things? I mean, do you find that people that you've researched and studied and have encountered have been able to fill the void when they have found their way with God, or have they been able to fill that, or have some been able to fill that void without God? I'm curious to know your thoughts on that.
Everyone that I have spoken with, interacted with, that, well, first of all, let me back up. I don't think I've ever met anyone that's admitted they feel the void. Be honest with you.
Really? I think it's a blind spot.
Wait a minute. Let's kind of park on that. Like, you're saying that you've never met anyone that has been that. Are they lacking the courage, or are they lacking the awareness, or both?
Well, remember the book is Searching for Dad: 9 Side Effects of Growing Up Fatherless, and how to overcome them. But if you read the book, I also say within the book, you don't always overcome them all.
Yeah.
Sometimes you learn to live with them. And certain people learn to live with certain side effects. Now, we're talking about the void. My faith filled it a lot. But as you know, I was blessed to find my father's nephews and nieces. And you and I went to California. I met an aunt that passed away this year. Rest in peace. And when my nephews and my cousins, his nephews and nieces speak of my father, they speak highly of him. And I found myself filling that void again. And I'm still got faith in God, don't get me wrong, but my humanness shone through, and it hadn't for years. But when I hear them talk about him, they would tell stories about this, and they went to his house, and they went to his farm, and they went to his funeral home, and they wrote, and he came to their baseball game, and I remember sitting there thinking, "Ooh,
yeah,
ooh, I feel something," And I wasn't jealous of them, I wasn't angry with them, but I missed that. I'm back at the Bulls game now.
Yeah,
I'm back at the Bulls game, and so. But I would have told you before that experience, I feel the void. It's totally full.
See, that's major.
Does that make sense? To your point?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. I think that, again, there's I think that answers my question. It is what you're describing is awareness.
Awareness.
Right.
Yeah, it is not recognizing it until you have the tools to recognize it.
Well, what if you have a disease, right, that doesn't surface for years?
A disease?
Some sort of, like, let's talk medical. Let's say there's a disease.
Are you giving us an example?
Okay. So you have a disease. It hasn't surfaced. Nobody knows of it yet, but it's lying dormant for how long?
Right.
until a symptom or something happens that brings attention to it. Right. So it's the same thing as I thought I was healed from a lot of my childhood trauma until
something happened.
Right. Like, and I'll be real, Brandon, not that there's jealousy, like that's not the word. It's like, there's like, and I've told you, having parents like yours, like you guys, right? It's like, I wish I could have had that. So it's back to that Bulls game. It's not like, I'm jealous of him or I wish bad. It's that.
It reminds me of your son and my grandson. Remember?
Yes.
You want to tell that story?
No, you go ahead. I like the way you tell it.
Well, I took my grandson and Josh took his son. We went out and we went to a sushi. And we just interacted, right? I interacted with Azariah, and you interacted. What's your son? Is it
Jordan?
Jordan, all those J's, Jordan. And what you told me, and I think you tell this better. What you told me afterwards, I wasn't there. What your son said to you.
Oh, okay. Well, that part then, yeah.
Yeah, that part.
Man, he just the relationship that you had.
Yeah,
he was curious. He didn't have, because there's no active grandparent in his life.
He wished he had a grandfather in his life.
Yeah.
Yet he still had his dad in his life. And that's another whole void.
That's one of the things
that's another whole void.
That's something that I wasn't let me say, like we use that example, the disease, something that's been lying dormant.
Right.
This is a newfound struggle that's for me.
Yeah.
Like, dang, my kids don't have, my mother-in-law, he goes and spends a week with her in the summer and all that, so, but outside of those type of things, there's not really an active grandparent in my kid's life whatsoever.
Whoever thought about that?
Now that I can speak to that for sure.
That's been a struggle. Like, man, I wish they had that too. This is another symptom of fatherlessness or whatever, and even motherlessness if you want to go that far. But that makes me want to be in a hell of a grandfather, like I see you model. Right, taking the kids, spending the money with a bougie taste.
But Brandon said it. Brandon said
Me too.
it when we met my father's side of the family, and one of the things that he got really emotional. And he frustrated me at the time because I didn't understand. I hadn't gotten there yet. But one of the things you said, that because it's generational. Remember that?
Yeah, absolutely, it's generational.
It's generational, and. He had a void, though he had me there. He had a void because he didn't interact with my father's side of the family.
Yeah.
But I thought nothing of that. That was a blind side for me.
Because I'm here.
A blind spot.
Because you was there.
I'm there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, this is what bothers me about American culture, to be quite honest. We are extremely nonchalant and lackadaisical about procreation and reproduction. Outside of the modern Western context, making babies was one of the most important things that you did. Okay? Yeah. Your line and lineage, your tribe, your people, your tongue. I mean, there are quite literally people groups that are no longer in existence. They've been wiped off the face of the earth.
Right.
When we look at the people that are here, it's because their bloodlines persisted.
Right.
Okay, they overcame things. There was an ability to make sure that your lineage was secured. So when I see people that don't take that seriously, to be quite frank, I don't respect them. I have an issue with men who don't take that seriously. And so the residual effect and impact of that is not having a connection to that bloodline. Now for us, those of us that are Afro-descendant people, we have fake last names anyway. None of us are Europeans. We're all running around with European names. It's ridiculously foolish, and we act like it's normal, right? For there to be black people named Washington and Brown and Jones and Johnson. But beside the point there, my last name should not even be what it is. If the man who is my grandfather would have lived righteously and done what he was supposed to be doing.
But you still have a European last name.
But that's my point. But what I'm saying, not only do I have an arbitrary last name, it's not even the right arbitrary last name. Okay, it's not even the right
I
one.
feel that to my core. Believe me.
Hey, I've got some name that has no association with any bloodline or anything. It's just you might as well stick anything. And this is the reason why although I don't agree theologically with the Nation of Islam, I understand why there was the propensity to dissociate themselves between European identities. Why there was a Malcolm X and a Shabazz X and these kinds of things, right? Again, I sideline that point to make the greater point for this conversation is that the void that your son experienced in seeing my son interact with his grandfather is the same thing that I felt.
Yeah.
I didn't have any grandfathers that were involved in my life. One I saw maybe 5 times in my entire life. The other one I saw once, and it wasn't even a true introduction. I just saw him.
Yeah.
You know, and they were they were wanting to make sure that I didn't lash out or like jump out the car and slap him in his face, because that's what I wanted to do. You see what I'm saying? So I didn't have any grandfathers that I had any, interaction with that imparted things on me. I think I got a couple nuggets from my mother's father, but that was it. I mean, that there wasn't an active relationship there because he wasn't involved in his daughter's life. Yeah. So I don't know what it is about that generation of our family that decided that it wasn't important for them to be present or active men in the lives of their children, but that's what they chose, and the consequences. It goes through not just the first generation; it goes to the second generation.
I didn't grow up with grandmother or grandfather; they were all dead when I was born. So,
I mean, I think that's the hard part, is that this is such a.
But being dead is one thing. Being alive
and not around
is worse. I'd rather for you to be dead, because then you have no excuse. If you're dead, what you gonna do about it? But if you're alive and I know where you live.
I guess what I'm saying though is, I also can talk about that particular void because I did grow up with people who had grandparents, and they go to their grandmom's house, and their grandmother cooked cakes and pies and whatever their grandparents did. I didn't have any of that either, so I can relate to that. But my point was, when we're talking about the void, I didn't realize you had that void. And Josh was saying that it's like a disease or something. I have psoriasis. I didn't know I had psoriasis until I was 50 years old. And when finally, I went to the doctor, and she said, well, you've always had it. It's just been dormant. Most people have it, and something brings it out. Stress in some people, a sickness, it just depends.
Yeah.
Something
brings it out.
Triggers it. I started my business, and I had a new business, and I was trying to make payroll, and I was trying to do all these things. I was under stress, and that stress brought out that psoriasis in me.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's because Brandon said something that when you talk about the lineage. So my grandfather died recently on my father's side, and didn't know much about him.
Okay.
I met him a couple of times. I knew where he kept his weed. You know what I'm saying?
You knew where he kept his weed.
Oh, yeah. My dad did too. That's how I found out. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, he passed, and I found out that he didn't have his last name, which means that, and then his correct last name, and then my father also doesn't, because my grandfather was Willie Sane. My dad is Burns, which was, my grandmother basically kept him with the same name as his sisters. And so and that's when you got me. I got Warmbrodt. My mama's not even named Warmbrodt no more. Right. So I got a name that has literally no ties to anywhere. Yeah. And so we're looking at generations of not even having our own names.
It's crazy.
As the men.
I have there's a person that I know in the family that she had 2 kids, and then she got married, and her husband, she had 2 kids by her husband, so she had 4 kids. Okay, so her first kid, boy, second kid, girl, and then a boy, girl with her husband, and she named the other 2 kids by her husband her maiden name, last name. And to this day, that boy carries his mother's last name. And they got angry with me when I said, what about his lineage? And his father's still living today. Because she's passed away, father's still living today, but yet his son is not carrying his last name.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel that. I was born Rymer, R-Y-M-E-R, my mother's maiden name.
But why would a man allow his wife, he's married to this woman, to name this kid after her maiden name?
We should definitely, that should be another podcast episode altogether.
Yeah, no,
seriously,
no, for sure,
we should note that. Whoever's taking notes in here, I don't know, Josh, if you take notes.
Sometimes they change it.
We need to know. No, seriously, we should have a whole, because we're getting down another whole rabbit trail. I know we're talking about the void, and I want to make sure we stay on track with that. But like, we should really table this, because there's a lot that I have to say about the whole line and lineage conversation, and we could be in here for an hour.
No,
at
I
least
agree.
Talking about
I'll
that.
agree, but I think this is part of the void, because I know for me it bothers me that I want to be Burns, even though my dad's, that wasn't his lineage either, but that's what we got.
But that was your dad, though.
Right, that's my dad, so I want to be Burns. But now I got kids, so I'm gonna have to change their names. And it's so as we get further and further disassociated, we just accept it, right? And that's part of those things. When I hear Warren, it bothers me, because that's not my name. That's not what I wanted.
It's weird.
That's not what
I mean,
chose.
I feel the same. I feel the exact same way.
And it's hard.
Okay.
But,
see, and for me and him, I have to. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence and parenting in our
Which
next
we need to
section.
transition, actually.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we need to transition.
Okay. We talk about the void many times.
Okay, I want to leave you with this right here. If you're listening, those are listening.
They better be listening to all this work we're doing in here.
When you think about the void, how has the absence of your father shaped your beliefs about yourself? Drop us a line on that. Another question, what would it feel like to release blame and begin healing? And lastly, are you open to something greater stepping into that space? 3 questions for you. Hit us up on our
the places. Go ahead, Josh.
social platforms, hey, fatherfactorpodcast.com. That's the hub, get you wherever you go. Of course, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on TikTok as well. You can shoot us an email, brm2@fatherfactorpodcast.com. But make sure you like, subscribe, and comment and review us on the platforms that
and they
you
can
listen
make
on.
comments at the bottom, right?
And of course, YouTube, we're ready for those keyboard warriors.
There you go.
We ready.
Okay. You have been listening to The Father Factor. Why? Because fathers count. Remember, fathers, all your kids are equally yours. Thank you for listening.